Today's webinar is Insuring the Holidays. During the holidays, whether it's winter holidays, spring holidays, or others, personal lines clients have more risk than worrying about what to wear or what dish or gift to bring to the big event. If we're going to talk about insuring the holidays, gifts are a pretty big part of holiday traditions, so we're going to start there. Have you thought of ways to connect with your clients over new toys or trinkets more than once a year? If you've got some great tips, please drop those in the chat. I'll be happy to share what contacts or touch points that you provide with your clients. I'm going to go ahead and reach over here and mute Alexa just in case she decides to chime in on this. All right. You should reach out to your clients more than once a year. Don't just leave it to a renewal questionnaire because there are special limits for specific property in the homeowner's policy. For the ISO Homeowners 3, which is what I'm going to talk mostly about today, since I can't possibly teach to all of the carriers that you may have access to, we're going to stay kind of close to ISO and then maybe just generically talk about coverage in general and what you might see. For the ISO Homeowners 3 special form, watercraft are limited to $2,000. That's not a lot, and that includes the watercraft and any trailers or equipment. My husband wants a boat. If he's going to get a boat, which he's not, so don't spoil that for him, then I would need to get a watercraft policy because my homeowner's policy just isn't going to give me very much. But just in case I forgot, well, then maybe I'll have some limited coverage under the homeowner's policy for that. That includes all types of water toys, including sailboats and motor drive watercraft, maybe some canoes or paddle boats. One of my parents has one of those foot paddle boats that they keep off of their dock. That would be included in that watercraft $2,000 limit as well. Clients love to gift money, and if they have lots of nieces and nephews or other family members, you might go ahead and stuff, or they might go ahead and stuff that in an envelope, and it's all sitting under a tree right now until the big day. And if there's a loss, which fire losses from Christmas trees are a pretty big loss, there's only $300 per loss, not per gift, just per loss. Things like jewelry, watches, furs, those are pretty common to give during holidays, whether it's festive holidays or maybe it's a Mother's Day or something like that, Father's Day. Those are pretty common gifts to give, and those have a special limit for theft. For theft losses, you may be limited to around $2,000 under the homeowner's policy. If it's any other type of loss that's covered by the home policy, then they'll get up to the coverage C limit of liability. The same applies for firearms. Those are limited by theft. Those are pretty common gifts to give as well. My husband's in law enforcement. I'll talk about him a couple of times today. He's in law enforcement, and gosh, if I got him a firearm, every time we turned around, he'd be a happy man. But those are limited for loss by theft up to $3,000. In 2022, ISO recognized that drones and model or hobby aircraft are pretty expensive little gadgets and now have limited those to $2,000 per loss. Though some homeowners carriers may not have adopted that type of language yet and still include them in the total limit of liability for personal property. My dad's really big into drones and he spends a lot of money on those suckers. Let's not forget the section of the policy that specifically lists certain property that won't be covered under a homeowner's policy. And these may include gifts like puppies or birds or fish. We went to the pet store to get our dogs a dog bed and ran into a cat named Millie. And now I'm trying to convince my husband to let me get a cat named Millie. He says, no, we're not buying a cat. So I said, fine, I'll buy a litter pan and the cat comes free with it. It's fine. Now he still said no, but we're working on it. Motor vehicles, which are defined in the ISO homeowners policy, includes any land or amphibious vehicle that is self-propelled or capable of being self-propelled. Forget your cars because that's where your brain probably originally goes and where your client's brain is going to go too. But think about motorized bicycles that your clients are buying for their kiddos now, or the motorized scooters. Those are really popular items. I know I bought one for my daughter last year. It's a little over $1,000. But if these items are damaged, they are only covered as personal property if they're used to solely service a residence or designed to assist the handicap. So that's going to be the little mobility scooters. Those would be covered as personal property. But my daughter's motorized scooter that I bought her last year, like I said, it cost around $1,000. If I had an ISO style homeowners policy, it's not covered for property damage under the ISO homeowners policy because it's not used to service a residence and it's not designed to assist the handicap, even though sometimes she thinks her legs are broken. Don't forget though, if the personal property is covered, even if it has a special limit that may be defined under the homeowner's policy, and there's a lot of them listed there. So pull out that policy and get to reading. The loss must be covered by the policy. And there's two types of homeowner policies out there. There's a named peril policy and an open peril policy. If your client's home policy is like the ISO special form, the HO3, personal property gets named peril coverage. So be very careful to understand what type of policy you're selling. So for a loss to be covered under a named peril policy, you have to actually find that peril named there. For the HO3, fire losses are obviously covered. That's kind of where homeowners coverage originated anyways. Damage caused to items, if they're in the client's automobile, like they're out there shopping around and now they've got this huge stack of presents sitting in the back and they're involved in an accident, it's not covered under the automobile policy, but would be covered under the homeowner's policy. But has anyone ever seen a deer crash through a home window and create all kinds of damage? I've seen lots of pictures of those. I've had a couple of clients that have had that happen, and it's a total disaster. And not one that's usually a named peril. Although I did review a policy once that had wild bears as a named peril. If you have that carrier in your book of business, then you'll know exactly who I'm talking about. But wild bears, but deer was still not one of them. So therefore, the damage to personal property is not going to be covered if Bambi comes crashing through the window. An open peril policy, or for an open peril policy, losses are covered as long as they're not excluded by the policy. So rather than looking for specific named perils, you'll be looking to see if the cause of loss is excluded. So for the party crashing deer, well, unless I'm blind, there's not an exclusion in the ISO HO5 comprehensive forms, such as party crashing animals. Just damage caused by an owned animal or caused by nesting, infestation, or yucky secretions released by animals. Sorry, there's no skunk coverage. You do have some options for beefing up the coverage though. First, there's endorsements. ISO has the following endorsements, as do most home insurers. The scheduled personal property endorsement that allows your clients to specifically request or schedule, in other words, coverage for certain classes of property like watches, jewelry, furs, collections, art, and more. I'm sure you're very familiar with those endorsements. Even when the home policy is a named peril policy, the endorsement will broaden coverage and provide open peril coverage. It gets rid of those theft limitations too, so that's good. The client can declare a value for coverage, but loss will be settled at the least of repair cost, ACV, or replacement costs. The scheduled personal property agreed value loss settlement endorsement is available as well, allows your client to select a limit that they would like the item insured for, but that doesn't mean they're going to get guaranteed replacement costs. So be careful with that one too. Second, you can also offer your client a specialty policy like personal articles, a separate standalone personal articles policy, whatever you might want to call those, a valuable articles policy, a personal articles floater, an inland marine policy, whatever your name is for those by your carriers or maybe within your agency. You can also get a watercraft or recreational vehicle policy for those very special toys that don't really get a lot of coverage underneath the homeowner's policy. All right, the small gifts are great, but the big ones are better. Raise your hand if you'd like a new car for Christmas. Go ahead and raise your hand. Can you raise your hand? Raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Okay, never mind. Put your hand down because I can't see you anyways. So for the ISO personal auto policy, a newly acquired auto is purchased or acquired by the you for the policy. So you'll need to know who is considered a you on personal auto policies you write. This can vary between carrier and even vary between states. ISO says a you is the named insured in the declarations and a spouse if a resident of the home. So if a client purchased a new car in their teen's name, well, that's not going to work on mom or dad's auto policy. The teen will need to have their own auto policy and before that car drives off the lot, because once it drives off the lot, if you don't have the coverage in place and it's in junior's name instead of mom or dad's name, well, you're just not going to have coverage for that because it's not a newly acquired auto under mom and dad's policy. Now, as long as that shiny new baby qualifies as a newly acquired auto, then the personal auto policy will generally provide the broadest coverage already purchased for a limited time. So when coverage like comprehensive coverage or collision coverage isn't purchased on a personal auto policy, The policy may only provide anywhere from 4 to 30 days. It varies by carrier, varies by state even, of automatic coverage. And you may not even have automatic coverage there. So you really need to check the definition of newly acquired auto under each one of the auto products that you sell, because it may or may not be covered. So here again, insurance professionals should really be familiar with the policies they sell, or at least check the policy definitions before they say, oh, you've got automatic coverage for blah, blah, blah days. I mean, that's a pretty standard one that I think I might have been guilty of myself in my early days of saying, oh, you've got automatic coverage for 14 days until you can call me on Monday morning and tell me what you bought. Right? All right, so the small gifts are great, but the big ones are better. So raise your hand if you would like a new car. I'm not sure where we lost audio, but we're just gonna start there. Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like a new car. Put it down because I can't see you anyways. You couldn't see me just a moment ago anyways, but we'll get restarted on that. For the ISO personal auto policy, a newly acquired auto is purchased or acquired by the you of the policy. So you'll need to know who is considered a you. I've already got that up on the screen. Again, if we've already said this, I apologize for repeating it, but I'm not really sure where we got disconnected. ISO says a you is the named insured in the declarations and a spouse of a resident of the same home. So if a client purchased a new car in their teen's name, that's not going to work on the mom and dad policy. They'll need to have a policy in the teen's name before the car drives off the lot, preferably. Now, as long as the car qualifies as a newly acquired auto because it was acquired by mom or dad or whomever, then the auto policy generally provides the broadest coverage purchased on the policy for a limited time.
Yes. Just if you want to take a look at the question box, everyone, thank you for your feedback. We are on holiday.
I'm not seeing any comments in the question box, to be honest.
Really? Okay.
So if you will check those for me, nothing's coming through. It's as blank can be.
Okay, sure thing. We've heard the car piece. We are on holiday mishaps. We got disconnected at the start of the next session. There we go.
Okay, absolutely. Well, let's move on then. All right, so most of that was standard practice. Is that where we left off? I'm not sure if I already told you that if you want to know more about these coverages, then you can check out our CISR courses or not. But okay, so I'm constantly teaching my kiddos about things to watch for. Going back to the scooter that we got for Christmas, we don't let friends drive it. Not at all. It's not happening. When I was younger, we had a go-kart and my father would take us to ride it around parking lots. And I remember one particular year, my brother's friend was driving it and he ran into a power transformer, like it was on the ground. It was a big boxy one, caused some damage. My goodness, I think that was actually the first time that I've heard of a liability release as a child. And maybe that's where I get my insurance brain from, because from that point forward, my dad had friends sign and their parents sign a liability waiver for not only the go-kart, but this massive trampoline that we have in the back. Now trampolines are much smaller and kind of a personal size, but it was a huge trampoline. All right, so let's see. The risk that you may have, I'm not sure, what we've got. And let me try pop the chat out one more time. There's still nothing in the chat. That's all right. Molly or Katie will let me know if you guys say anything really fun. So we've got holiday parties. Those are pretty big risks. Potlucks. Yeah, anyone that sees an image on social media of a delicious dish, but the cat's tail is grazing the top of it, that's disgusting. I know for one, I'm a test taster when I cook for my family, so my fingers are in everything. And I have to give a really good conscious effort not to do that when I'm cooking for others. Family, enough said. Family is a huge concern when they're visiting for the holidays. So let's see what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at parties. We're going to consider when they're being hosted at home or in the residence versus hosting them at an event venue. If your client's family gathering is large enough, they may just rent a restaurant or an event hall, maybe for a wedding, or a hotel event space if it's just that big. Maybe they need space to spread out and avoid Uncle Joe over on the other side of the room. What about the liability that might come with serving alcohol? We need to consider the implications of what that will look like, and we will in just a moment. Family traveling from out of town and staying with the client can come with a great set of concerns. Property damage, whoops, let's advance the slide a little bit. Property damage, maybe of guests' items that they bring with them or of your client's own, personal liability, as well as auto liability when visitors borrow autos from the driveway. All of these are risks. You guys thought we were going to come here and start talking about watches and jewelry and furs and everything else. That's so standard. Everybody thinks of that stuff. Let's think about what kind of liability we've got when people are visiting us around parties. I know what kind of liability I think about, which is why I just don't host parties. When's the last time you actually attended a home party? Holiday or none? Were you able to turn off the insurance professional risk manager role in your head? If not, I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat. Maybe if there's something really interesting, Katie can chime in a little bit. Let me know in the chat what you noticed while you were there, or maybe what are some things that you would consider if you were hosting a party. All right, injuries for sure. I've seen more stories than I can care to talk about decks collapsing because too many people were out there. And in fact, I met some friends for a weekend gathering at an Airbnb in Tennessee, and there were risk management signs everywhere. There was one about only having 4 people on the deck at a time. My first question, I thought it was nice, but my first question was, how did they know 4 is where the line should be drawn? Like, did they add a 5th person and they heard a crack or something like that? Now maybe we need to do some inspections of that. Food consumption, if Katie just dropped in my other chat over here, loose carpets, absolutely. Food consumption is another one, went too far. My son has tree nut allergies and my daughter is sensitive to dairy. Consider what food contaminants should be addressed and liability around that, or simply being in a hurry or just flat out terrible cook. Maybe you left the deviled eggs out too long and you could give the guests food poisoning. Property damage, say the TV topples over after a strong bump and maybe the client is cleaning, or maybe the client is cleaning up a crystal bowl after their guest, that their guest leaves and breaks it. Risk management 101, in my opinion, is being helpful lends more liability risk than keeping your hands off of other people's stuff. So I'm just gonna let you go and pick your crystal dish back up and you can clean it when you get home. Party perks can be party poopers. Serving alcohol or maybe other party favors at home may land your clients with greater liability than they'd expect. So let's take a look at the risk of injuries first. Trip and falls, like I said, somebody mentioned the loose carpets, loose rugs, stairs, shoes left out, little ankle biting puppies, and we're not going to get into animal bites today, but that's another risk. Decks, my deck right now is a liability, and with all the rain that we've had, it is still raining. I swear, it feels like it's been raining for 40 days and 40 nights at this point. It is probably an even bigger liability right now than it was this past summer. So decks can only handle so much weight before they buckle. Let's also consider, whoops, went too far. Let's also consider burns, hot stoves, hot dishes, or maybe the food warmers with those little sterno fuel cans underneath. Those are really attractive to kids that may come to the party. What about bonfires or fire pits? Those are really popular. Or maybe some outdoor gas heaters that have those canopy things. There's burn liability there. Here's our first look at the homeowner's liability coverage. Your insured must be legally liable for the policy to pay, though defense coverage will still be provided even if the claim is baseless. We've got to find out whether or not they're legally liable, right? Well, as long as the claim would have been covered under the policy, then defense will be covered, will be provided by the policy while that liability is being determined. For personal liability limits, think about the deck. If there were multiple people injured, there's still only 1 limit per occurrence. So now is the time to talk to your clients about high limits of liability and up to and including a personal umbrella liability policy. I know you guys know what that is. Excuse me. For medical payments to others coverage, legal liability isn't required and is kind of like goodwill coverage for med expense. So as an insurance professional, if you're toying between a $1,000 or $5,000 med pay limit, that could be the difference of someone being easily satisfied with $5,000 for their medical expenses versus being ticked off because they could only be offered $1,000 and now they filed a liability claim or worse, a lawsuit. Always opt for the higher limits of liability when you can. So your client tidied everything up and the home maintenance is up to par and they're proceeding with the party. It's not me, it's probably one of your other ones, okay? Now we need to think about food consumption. Other potential hazards here are food allergies and food poisoning. Maybe there's tree nuts or cinnamon or something in it that wasn't disclosed. Maybe the potato salad was left out for too long. According to the CDC, there are approximately 31 pathogens or parasites that are commonly transmitted by food. An estimated 9.4 million episodes of foodborne illness every year that result in over 55,000 hospitalizations and 1,300 deaths. I really hope that's not one of your clients. Oh, excuse me. While there's an exclusion in the homeowner's policy for communicable diseases, foodborne illness is not considered a communicable disease, so liability coverage from your client's homeowner policy will apply. But what about edibles? They put on the Mary Jane's famous brownies. I had on their grandma's famous brownies at first, but I thought Mary Jane was funnier. Anyways, so your client baked regular brownies and pot brownies and got them mixed up. The ISO homeowners policy has excluded liability arising out of the possession by any person of a controlled substance. And right now, federally, cannabis is still a Schedule 1 narcotic. Excuse me. But now that there's a lot of legalization happening and the federal government is lingering not too far behind of legalization or in the least decriminalization, the 2022 ISO homeowners policy has updated their language to say cannabis, whether or not considered a controlled substance. So now we're not just looking at the controlled substance piece of it for cannabis, except when it's legitimately used under a prescription prescribed by a healthcare professional. So this is going to eliminate liability coverage for recreational brownies and other edibles or straight blunts for that matter. So hopefully your clients' parties aren't too blazing. So just as we saw before, the liability coverage to pay on a claim, for liability coverage, to pay on a claim, the client must be legally liable. And there is one limit regardless of the number of claimants sick with food poisoning or that are allergy affected. All right, after parties, there is usually always a mess, even if a small one, but let's consider coverage when property gets damaged. Recall from the beginning of the webinar that the homeowner's policy may either be provided with a name peril style coverage or open peril style coverage. An accidental bump that knocks the TV to the floor is not a named peril under the ISO Homeowners 3 or HO3 policy, is how you may notice it. When it came through downloads in my agency, it actually said HO3 there. So I got used to using the terminology HO3 or HO5, and even HO6 for the condo. But if you have written an ISO HO5, which is a comprehensive form, and an open peril form, well, a TV falling is not exactly excluded. Turning in a loss like that, however, is pretty petty, and in a hard market like what we're in now, home insurance rates are high and coverage is hard to place. So that style of claim is going to hurt the client more than help them. So understand that accidental breakage or damage to property is generally not going to be covered as a loss under a named peril policy like the HO3. Under the open peril policy like the HO5, where now we have to pay more attention to the exclusions, generally fragile items like statues, glassware, porcelain, and stuff like that, it's all excluded too. It's under the exclusions, or I think it's under named perils, what's not covered. So you've got to pay attention to perils insured against is what's called perils insured against what's not covered, and then you've got to flip over to the exclusions for section 1 as well. Let your clients know to put that kind of stuff away and help them obtain a personal articles policy, which will provide them with much broader coverage and generally much lower deductible than their homeowner's policy, and keep those claims off the homeowner's policy as well. All right, accidents happen and damage may occur to property of guests. Maybe a fire broke out in the home and now several coats and designer bags that are in the valet closet, or for us middle class people draped across the master bedroom bed, are damaged. The homeowner's policy will generally provide the option to extend Section 1 property coverage or Coverage C personal property to the property of others while it is on the resident's premises, quote unquote, or the property of a guest while the property is in any residence occupied by the insured. That's a lot, which is why I slowed down. So what I've just said is that your client is probably going to have the option under their homeowner's policy to use their property limits meant for their items to pay for damage to their guest's property when the loss is covered under the policy. But for coverage to apply, like I said, coverage would need to be, the loss would need to be covered by the policy. The loss is subject to the policy deductible, and coverage used for the property of others, the guests on the residence premises, will reduce how much is available for damage that might have also been caused to your client's property. Now, if for some reason damage to property of others can't be covered under Section 1 property coverage, there's Section 2 liability coverage for damage your client may be legally liable for, and which is covered by the homeowner's policy. If damage to property is property loaned or that which is rented to your client for their property, like maybe some decor or serving dishes or possibly equipment loaned by the caterer. I know a lot of folks around here kind of live in an upper middle class neighborhood, and there's a lot of much larger homes than mine where I know they do come in with caterers and they do rent event tables or whatever to set up around their home in order to have these tea parties or whatever they're holding. So for those, Section 2 excludes coverage for property rented to, used by, or in the care of an insured. So rented to, used by, or in the care of an insured. But Section 2 additional coverage usually gives back limited coverage. The ISO homeowners policy, for example, provides up to $5,000 under additional coverages for Section 2 for damage to property rented to, used by, or in the care of an insured. All right, moving on. Here's some fun stuff. I know it's what you guys might have been looking for already. I really wish I could see the chat, gosh darn it. So here's some fun stuff. The social host liability is a legal term for criminal and civil responsibility of a person who furnishes liquor to guests. While social hosts may not be liable for injuries of the drunken guest because the intoxicated guest is also considered negligent or legally liable for their own behavior and their own injuries, the host can be held liable for injury or damage to third parties and may even be liable for injury to passengers of guests who were driving intoxicated. Social host liability laws are usually directed at serving minors alcohol, since adults should have better judgment, but that's not always the case. Some state laws extend host liability to the actions of both minors and adults who were served alcohol at the time of this. And then at the time of this webinar, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead of myself. At the time of this webinar, states that have social liability laws in place for furnishing alcohol to minors include Alabama, Arizona. Let's see, these are going to be the blue states: Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Illinois, Kansas, Michigan, New Hampshire, Utah, and Wyoming. All the blue states there are ones where I found social host liability laws for serving minors. Whereas Alaska, all your yellow states, we did not do blue and red states over here, okay? So blue and yellow states. Your yellow states like Alaska, Connecticut, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Missouri, New Jersey, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Washington, Wisconsin, and a partridge in a pear tree. That's a lot. All have social host liability laws that are imposed on hosts who serve alcohol to guests regardless of their age. I'm quite certain, I've not seen the attendee list so far to see who or where you're from, but I'm certain we've at least gotten one of your states in there. I know we've got Arkansas in there. I'm from Arkansas. I'm sitting in Arkansas right now, and we've got laws for social host liability for minors. For those of you who insure bars, we're not going to talk about commercial liability in this particular webinar, but you can attend CISR courses or CFC courses to find out how liability might apply for serving alcohol. So for those of you who insure bars, taverns, or restaurants that sell and serve alcohol, they could be held liable if they provide alcohol to a patron who later gets into an accident and injures somebody. And the liability varies by state and is established by what are known as dram shop laws. All right, so let's consider coverage or exclusions under the homeowner's policy now. When you think about liability risks of serving intoxicants, I'm gonna say intoxicants broadly because there's more than alcohol that people are serving at parties these days. And driving, you may immediately think of an automobile policy, but for your clients who are hosting, they aren't going to have coverage under their automobile policy for a guest who's driving their own auto, meaning the guest driving the guest's own auto. So we'll need to examine the homeowner's policy first. Remember that each state has varying laws. There is a question in the chat. I will take a look at it in just a moment. So remember that each state has varying laws regarding social host liability for the homeowner's policy to pay any limit. The policyholder will need to be legally liable, though while determining legal liability, the policy will still provide defense until the determination is made. You'll need to consider the limits of liability for your client. And again, always offer your clients more. The premium increase is so very little between the coverage limits offered. So why not offer the client more coverage and leave it rather than leave them underinsured, right? Also understand that coverage varies by carrier. So review each homeowner's policy for any exclusions, conditions, limitations that may affect the insured's social liability risk. Let's take a look at this. Michael asks, what's the difference between serving minors and general social host? So on that slide that you saw, the map with serving minors and social host, that's the difference between the style of law that might be in the state. Some laws will only have laws that relate to serving a minor or a minor consuming alcohol on the insured's residence premises, okay? Whereas other states, they don't care whether you're a minor or you're 50 years old. You're still going to have a legal responsibility for serving that alcohol at your residence if you didn't serve it responsibly, right? So that's the difference between those two colors. Here, I'll just flip back for a second. Serving minors, those states only have laws related to serving minors, and then the yellow states have laws for minors related to minors and older adults as well. All right. I already said that for clients, if their guest causes a vehicle accident, after drinking at the client's party, the client's auto policy is not going to respond. Well, that's because for the ISO personal auto policy, an insured is you or any quote unquote family member for the use of any auto or any other person driving your covered auto. So a guest driving their own vehicle is not a your covered auto on your client's policy. But let's flip the script a little bit and consider intoxicated guests and their personal auto policy. If we change the dialogue a little bit from what you see on the screen, for their covered auto, any person, but only with respect to legal responsibility for the active and insured or the guest, we're talking about the guest's auto policy here, covered by the guest policy. That means that your client may be considered an insured under the guest's personal auto policy for liability coverage because they serve the alcohol and now they're responsible for the actions. But let's hope that they've got some good limits. Umbrella policies are not standardized. Each umbrella product you write really should be individually analyzed. Don't just assume that each umbrella policy is the same. There are major differences between umbrella policies sometimes. The ISO personal umbrella policy will provide excess coverage for losses covered by the home policy. And what I'm trying to say is if all your personal lines clients don't have a personal umbrella, you've got some work to do, and that you'll not only give them more coverage for such a low premium, but also reduce your E&O risk for not offering them the coverage and explaining just how valuable it can be. Don't just offer them the quote and say you should have it. Really let them know how that coverage might be able to drop down and provide them broader coverage than their home or auto policies. So if your clients are going to host parties, how could you advise them? You might consider an email blast with information about social host liability in their state or your state, whichever, and provide some simple risk mitigation tips that are on your screen right now. Know your state laws around social host liability. Like I said, in Arkansas, social hosts can be held liable if they serve persons under 21. The Arkansas Social Host Liability Act 976 provides criminal liability for a social host who knowingly serves alcohol to minors or who knowingly allows minors to consume alcohol on their property. So they might not have actually served it to the person, but they might know that they're drinking it on their property. Okay. Do you happen to know the social liability law in your state? If so, drop it in the chat. Katie will send it to me over here. I'd love to share it with others so that maybe they might understand a social host liability law in a state that they're familiar with. Maybe advise your client to host parties at establishments with a liquor license that passes the liquor liability to the licensed establishment from the insured themselves. Absolutely promote designated driving and ensure guest safety, and clients should also stop serving alcohol or may consider stop serving alcohol before the event ends. Of course, that's not going to catch anybody who leaves early, but it could help. If you have any other tips, drop those in the chat too. I'll share those as well. All right, moving on. If your client decides to rent an event space for their party, this could be a Halloween ball, an event, a wedding event, or maybe a family gathering with way too many family members to fit inside the residence, your client may need to rent a venue. Your client's going to need to be aware of the homeowner's policy and umbrella policy limitations. Section 2, liability coverage. Let me check time. We got about 15 minutes left. I think we're making good time after we had that little snafu of being disconnected. All right, Section 2, liability coverage of the ISO homeowner's policy includes coverage for property damage to property rented to, excludes, I said includes, I meant excludes. It excludes coverage for property rented to, occupied, or used by, or in the care of an insured. Some homeowners policies may say care, custody, or control, so make sure you read that language. So this is going to include an event venue where your client rented, or maybe your client rented for a holiday party. Limited coverage is generally given back for fire, smoke, or explosion. So those New Year's parties that include the confetti cannons, we see a lot of fires that are started by those. Those are actually considered a type of explosive, since they have an accelerant that causes that confetti to shoot out. So if that little sucker sparks and causes a fire, that's covered. But consider sometimes those cannons get mixed up by Amazon or whomever. I've seen it happen, especially the colored ones. They get mixed up, or maybe your client has several of them because they're just a party animal. And some of them are the gender reveal powder style, that shoot the color out instead of party streamers. Well, damage caused to an event venue by getting color everywhere is not going to be covered because it wasn't fire, smoke, or an explosion. Damage caused to the event venue by guests will also not be covered by your client's homeowner's policy because it's not fire, smoke, or explosion. Let's take a look at the umbrella policy for a moment. It also has a care, custody, or control exclusion. So umbrella policies are not standardized, so they do need to be reviewed individually. But the ISO homeowner's policy is a little broader in coverage and may actually drop down to provide coverage where the homeowner's policy does not. The ISO umbrella says that there's an exclusion that won't cover property damage to property rented to, occupied, or used by, or in the care, custody, or control of an insured. Here's the kicker that makes it broader, to the extent that the insured is obligated to provide insurance. So as long as they're not obligated to provide insurance for that event or for the venue, then the party color streamer thing, or the smoke bomb or whatever it was, that type of coverage may actually be provided because they weren't required to provide insurance for it. But if by chance that your client is contractually obligated to provide insurance, well, then they're only going to have coverage for fire, smoke, and explosion. Everything else is not going to be covered. All right, special event coverage is relatively cheap. It's a one-shot type of policy for a particular event, once and done, and can provide valuable liability coverage or coverage for gaps in the homeowner's policy for personal, it can provide valuable coverage for gaps in the homeowner's and personal umbrella policy. These policies provide stuff like liability coverage, which will keep the claims off the homeowner's policy, post-liquor liability, generally as long as there's no transfer of money, care, custody, or control liability, and coverage for damage to premises and more. All right, let's shift a little bit. We've got 15 minutes left. We're making good time. I feel like I am talking my head off since I can't look at the chat. I'm trying to fill in the gaps where I can. Let's shift a little bit to the risks your clients are facing while family is in town for a visit. My husband is in law enforcement, and he says that the holidays are one of the busiest times of year for law enforcement professionals. And I would have thought that it was for thefts or break-ins to get those valuable presents, but no, he actually says it's for domestic disturbances between family members are what cause him the most headaches. Much of what we're going to review has already been skimmed over as we talked about risks of hosting social parties. So let's take a look. Your client, we're advancing. Your client may see a high risk of injury to visiting relatives as the client may not tidy up quite as much or make a thorough risk assessment of their home. Clients are generally a little bit more relaxed with family than they are with social hosting parties. When you travel, have you ever noticed how flimsy the toilet paper is? My husband always wants us to bring extra toilet paper from home, and I never do because there's a reason. It breaks down faster and prevents clogs. They're going to need that, right? Medications and cannabis, we've kind of touched on that before. These items generally are not as securely stowed or either placed behind lock and key and are more accessible when family is around. Automobile liability also becomes a factor to consider as well. So let's run through those. I think we can all do a risk assessment fairly easily on what's around our house that may cause injury to others. Earlier, somebody said loose carpet. So take a look around where you're sitting. Hopefully you're at home. I'm making the assumption that we're all working from home. That's probably not a good assumption to make. You may be in the office too. Take a look around where you're sitting and let me know 1 to 2 risks you see immediately around you. Medical payments to others under the homeowner's policy cannot be used for insureds who are persons defined as family members. That might be a little confusing. So it can't be used for the insured themselves, your client, or their family members as defined by the homeowner's policy. So like I said, that might be a little confusing, but visiting relatives are not considered family members. Even your 40-year-old daughter that visits you from out of state, she's not considered a family member by the homeowner's policy. To be a quote unquote family member by the homeowner's policy, the person must be a resident relative of the insured. There's a couple of other stipulations in there with regard to age and everything like that, but we don't have time for all that. If you want to know more about that, you can go to one of our CISR courses, or maybe take a look at your homeowner's policies that you're selling, and you can find out a little bit more about who's a family member under the homeowner's policy. So unless the relative regularly resides in the home, they can access MedPay to others coverage if they're injured on the client's residence. Check. Let's take a look. So let's see, it looks like we've got some dog hazards, kid shoes, Christmas tree, electrical. That's a big one. Anybody do Elf on the Shelf? One of our elves got in the car and started driving into the Christmas tree and is all tangled up in a power cord right now. Okay. So yeah, that too. Maybe some unsecured bookshelves or TVs that represent like a tipping hazard. All of our bookshelves, we've got a ton of crap on our bookshelves, and those are secured to the walls because I have a 5-year-old that loves to scale things. He's a climber. All right, okay. The policy that says, or the policy says that MedPay to others can be used for a person on the residence with permission, which I guess is where my husband comes in because not all relatives are welcome, I suppose. And the limit selected on the policy is the most that will be paid per person. Again, the price difference between $1,000, $5,000, or maybe even $10,000 in MedPay is so small and could keep injured parties from filing a larger liability or lawsuit if there's not enough on the MedPay. So just consider those higher limits of liability instead of making the assumption that if MedPay is not enough, the liability coverage will catch it. Maybe try to preempt some of that with some higher MedPay limits. For the personal liability coverage, that's coverage E under the ISO homeowners policy. Oops, sorry. Regardless of the number of injured parties, maybe a water leak finally collapses the ceiling and injures visitors sitting on the couch. Again, that pesky deck, if everyone would just stay off the deck, there's only one limit. The higher, the better, obviously. So about those toilets, kind of alluded to those earlier, the ISO homeowners policy and many other homeowners policy exclude water which backs up through sewers, drains, or overflows or is otherwise discharged from a sump pump related or related equipment. Families staying with your clients are doing laundry. There are more of them taking showers, maybe long showers, more dishes to wash. Maybe the shower part, maybe your shower is the better shower and they are really happy to have good water pressure. I don't know. More dishes to wash, more children around to stuff things down the toilet, and more toilet paper being used. Also, more sanitary care products like flushable wipes or menstrual products are going down the pipes. Water backup during the holidays is actually fairly common. From my own personal experience, the only time I experienced a water backup claim was when I was out of town for a holiday and I had a house sitter staying here. So, I mean, that just kind of supports the argument here. People do things to your house that you normally wouldn't, and they do it at a higher volume than you would. So ISO offers 2 endorsements that you'll need to check your carriers for and check the accurate language as well. One of these endorsements is relatively new. The first endorsement is a limited water backup, sump pump discharge, or overflow. It can be provided, or it can provide up to $25,000 in limited coverage, but the backup must originate within the dwelling. So something clogging a pipe in the dwelling, okay? Broader water backup sump pump discharge coverage, that second endorsement there, is a new one to the ISO homeowners program, though insurance carriers have been offering broad water backup coverage for a while. it allows backup to originate within or outside of the dwelling. So that way, like if the storm drain down the road backs up or gets clogged and, somehow creates a backup in the house, since it's covered for both inside and outside the home, that would be covered, where under the limited endorsement it wouldn't be. Okay, so we talked about this one before. The homeowner's policy doesn't want to extend liability for illegal use or possession of narcotics. Now that cannabis is being legalized on the state level, the homeowner's policy has incorporated language that the use or possession of cannabis, whether or not, again, it's considered a controlled substance, will not receive liability coverage for BI or PD unless legitimately used under a prescription by a licensed healthcare professional. If your client's growing cannabis, that kind of activity is not prescribed by medical professionals, even if they have a medical cannabis prescription. So liability arising from those plants is not going to be covered by the homeowner's policy. What types of risks can occur for growing cannabis at home? You might be asking yourself, well, if you attended the High on Homeowners free webinar earlier this year, you might already know. Maybe a visiting pet eats on the plant, or a visiting teenager. I don't know if they're going to eat on the plant, but they might just take the plant, right? Maybe mold spores if the humidity need for growing those plants gets out of control. That all that stuff is considered a risk for growing cannabis at home. ISO now makes a limited cannabis liability endorsement available, which would give back some limited liability for recreational use. But honestly, I don't think any insurance carrier is going to offer that endorsement anytime soon, at least not until we figure out how all of these claims are going to flush out, right? Okay, so our last stop is for the automobile while family is in town. We got about 5 minutes left. I would have loved to have had time for questions, but our little snafu earlier kind of limited our time. So we're just going to keep on trucking away here for automobile liability coverage. Those vehicles can stack up in the driveway, and oftentimes whoever's vehicle is in the driveway might be the one that someone borrows. Just remind your clients of this. When you share your auto, you share your liability limits. When visiting family, drivers to your client's auto, it doesn't matter who's driving it. Any person driving your covered auto is going to be insured under your auto policy. So does your client know when they allow their family member to drive their auto because it was the last one in the driveway? Do they know how good of a driver their relative is? Do they know whether or not the relative is going to take time to familiarize themselves with a vehicle? Or will driving something like a semi-autonomous, or maybe an autonomous vehicle if you've got those around you, be a new experience and increase their chances of getting into an accident? Remember, the personal auto policy states that an insured for liability under the personal auto policy is anyone driving your covered auto. But what about the fun vehicles your client has? The holiday parade may be only moments away and Uncle Joe wants to jump into the golf cart and take the kiddies down to see it, or maybe it's time for your family golf outing. We live on a golf course, so you just take the golf cart anywhere, right? If you're anything like my household, we have motorized scooters, bikes, and skateboards, and all of those are considered motor vehicles as well under the homeowner's policy. Maybe for those living in fun snowy states, you might also have some snowmobiles. I don't, and I recently went to a snowy state and I saw a sign of crossing snowmobiles. I thought it was a jet ski. I was a little dumb. I didn't recognize it as a snowmobile. I thought it was a jet ski until somebody was like, why would a jet ski be crossing a road, Dustin? That doesn't make sense. Okay, I get it. Snowmobiles. All right, the homeowner's policy will provide liability coverage for the client using a non-owned recreational vehicle anywhere. So a rented golf cart counts. But for the toys they own, they're only covered when used on an insured location, or if it's a child's motorized toy designed for children under 7 and which doesn't exceed 5 miles per hour. Golf carts, the homeowner's policy provides motor vehicle liability coverage for specific golf carts. I was going to say specified. Specific golf carts, 4-seaters that don't exceed 25 miles per hour, and which is either being operated on the golfing facility for the purpose of either golf or other activities allowed by the golfing facility, or crossing public roads at designated golf cart crossings. The golf cart may also receive liability when it's being used in the residential facility or in the residential community. Pay attention here. In the residential community that's under an HOA or POA. This is very specific in the ISO homeowners policy. A residential community under an HOA or POA where your client resides and where the golf cart is legally allowed. So if it's not under an HOA or POA, you may not have liability coverage for that golf cart, even if it's allowed. The personal auto policy may provide coverage for recreational autos used by the client or their visiting relatives if used in a medical emergency or non-owned golf cart. So that's for the personal auto policy, medical emergency or non-owned golf carts, okay? If your client has these types of toys, rather than leave it to chance, you might need to seek a recreational vehicle policy or offer some proper endorsements to the homeowners, like the golf cart or snowmobile endorsements or other similar endorsements under the personal auto policy, like the miscellaneous vehicle endorsement or the snowmobile endorsement. One last consideration for those toys, check the homeowners policies for motor vehicle liability exclusions. I just told you that the ISO homeowners policy only provides liability coverage for owned children's toys designed for children under the age of 7 and that don't exceed 5 miles per hour. Sorry. My daughter's motorized scooter that exceeds 15 miles per hour, I think it goes up to 18 miles per hour, and then the e-bike goes up to 22 or 23 miles per hour. Well, she wrecked that 6 months after we got it, and we're lucky she didn't injure somebody else or damage property because we didn't have the proper endorsement on our policy for that. I didn't even think about it at the time, to be honest with you. So make sure your clients either have an applicable endorsement to their homeowner's policy, like the incidental low-powered recreational vehicle motor vehicle liability coverage, which provides coverage for those motor scooters up to 28 miles per hour, I think it is, or get them a recreational vehicle policy so that they can have coverage for that.